Bonsoir, everyone. Thank you for joining us this evening for the Newport Historical Society's last virtual lecture of 2021. This evening, we are pleased to host Norman Desmarais for the talk, Reevaluating Our French Allies. Tonight, Dr. Desmarais will discuss recent discoveries about the Count de Rochambeau's army that counter popular assumptions about the French participation in America's war for independence. This talk, based on research from his new book, The Road to Yorktown, The French Campaigns in the American Revolution, 1780 to 1783, is available at shopnewporthistory.com. Norman Desmarais is Professor Emeritus at Providence College and a member of Le Regiment Bourbonnais, the 2nd Rhode Island Regiment, and the Brigade of the American Revolution. He is editor-in-chief of the Brigade Dispatch, the journal The Brigade of the American Revolution. He is also the author of the 6-volume series, The Guide to the American Revolutionary War, and the 7-volume series, The Guide to the American Revolutionary War at Sea and Overseas. He has translated the Gazette Françoise and the diary of Count of Lauberdiere, published as The Road to Yorktown. Norm has also authored America's First Ally, France in the Revolutionary War, and Washington's Engineer, Louis Duportail, and the creation of an Army Corps. Now I'd like you to officially welcome Norman Desmarais.
Thank you, Elizabeth, and good evening to everybody. I'm going to try to share my screen. I expect most of you have either read the book or will read it or are reading it. So what I want to do tonight is not talk about what's in the book. I want to talk about what's not in the book. And what I mean by that is that the book is actually just a diary, and the manuscript of the diary has a lot of material that was supposed to be included as appendices. I translated all of it, but the publisher decided not to put the material in as appendices. Several of those appendices would have been newspaper issues, letters, poems, citations, congressional citations, and stuff like that, that he sort of kept as a scrapbook. One of the things that I want to spend a bit of time with is the Gazette Françoise. I translated the Gazette many years ago, and this particular newspaper came in there's 7 issues and a supplement that survive. I've seen quite a few different iterations of it in paper, book, and other different paper formats, microfilm, and also digital. There's only one. I thought there were multiple copies of this thing in existence, but there's only one copy of this. And the reason I come to that conclusion is that every issue that I've seen has a tear on the last page, and it's always in the same location. It's very unlikely that any 2 copies would have a tear in the exact same location and the exact same shape. Now, the slide that I just showed is the first page of the first issue. This page is the last page of the last issue, or at least the last issue that exists. And the reason I want to talk about this is that right here in this paragraph, in French and English, there's a note that the newspaper is looking for rags to make paper. Scholars have concluded that because of this ad, that the fact that this is the last issue that is in existence, they figured that the newspaper probably, or the press, went out of business after this issue, or that they did not have enough readership, or that they did not have enough paper. Another thing on the last page is right here is an ad for an almanac for 1781. Well, when I was working with the diary, there's a supplement to the Gazette in that diary, and I was ecstatic. This is the lower portion of the screen is the supplement of the Gazette that is in the the diary of the Count de Lauberdiere. The page on the, or the part of the page on the top is the supplement of the Gazette Françoise that was published in Newport. I assumed that, well, that when I looked at this, because of the similarity in the thing right here, the masthead. The masthead is quite similar in both, and the font, the type font is very similar. So when I saw that, I became rather ecstatic, and for quite a long time, I thought that this was a missing issue of the Gazette Françoise. And tonight I'm going to eat a big piece of humble pie because about a week or so after my article on this particular issue and the history of the publication, I found that I was doing some research on French newspapers, and I found that this supplement is not a supplement to the Gazette Françoise, it's a supplement to the Gazette de France. And the two gazettes have the main, the front page of the masthead on the front pages of each of these are very different, unlike the differences between, or the similarities between the two supplements. Well, anyway, the almanac that was to be published in 1781 was actually published. So the press did not go out of business, and it did not run out of paper because they published that almanac. They also published 27 copies of this Voyage de Newport à Philadelphie, Albany, etc. That is by the François Jean Marquis de Châteauroux. Now Châteauroux expanded on this, and the version that we currently know is in 2 volumes. But the version that was published in 1781 was published in only 27 copies. The Count de Lauberdiere was one of the owners of one of those copies, and he talks about it in his diary. The other part, the other document that did not appear in the published version of the diary is a map. We know this particular map is the map that was it's got Admiral Destouches' name in the masthead. So this indicates that map was published in the first quarter of 1781, almost a whole year after the landing. Destouches assumed command of the fleet after Admiral de Tonnay's death on December 15, 1780. He remained commander of the fleet until May 13, 1781, when Admiral de Barras arrived in Newport and took over as commander of the fleet. Now this map has, they mark a landing site over here and landing sites down here. If you, as I mentioned, this is not a contemporary map of the time of the landing. This was done quite a bit later. And if you look at this map, was sort of based on the work of Louis-Alexandre Berthier, who was Rochambeau's cartographer. And he probably had the most authoritative maps because he could do the maps at leisure while the French were in Newport, and he was not obstructed by combat with enemy or anything like that. So his maps were much more accurate than some of the maps that were done from a distance. And in his diary, he mentions that the map, the places for that he's marked as debarkation, as landing sites, are places that he expected the troops to land if Newport was being attacked by the British or any other enemy. So these were all possible places. The map that comes with the diary, and this is unique. This is the Lauberdiere's map. And this is the map that should have gone in the fly leaves of the diary, but it did not. You see there's a fold in the page here, right in the center. And in the original manuscript, that appears as a folded map in the fly leaves. But you have the layout of the city of Newport. But what I want to focus on is the details down here. He's got the landing site marked over here and over here. No landing site up in the area of where the Ida Lewis Yacht Club is, or Newport Beach. So this is the actual landing site. He doesn't actually mention the landing site at the time of the landing. It's only in October, where the troops are bored, and Rochambeau has all the troops reenacting or playing war games. They have a series of war games out at a place called Woods Castle. Now this map marks Woods Castle down here at Satchwas Point. Other maps mark Woods Castle up here in the area of Black Point. So apparently Wood owned quite a bit of property out here in this area. Lauberdiere notes that the landing site was 5 miles from the camp, and it is 5 miles from this point across the causeway to the campsite up in this area. He mentions that in October, when the troops are playing war games. He says that the troops are playing war games out near the landing site. And I'll mention this a little bit later when I talk about posting guards. This was one of the places that they posted a guard. Throughout the entire time that the French were in Newport, they posted a guard at 3 places. This was one of them. One would expect that the landing site would probably be here on Easton's Beach, but the British had created redoubts here, right near what is now Eustis Avenue, and there was another redoubt here at the end of the defense line. And these could have been occupied, and this landing on this beach, if the British had occupied the city, would have been like landing on Omaha Beach on D-Day. This would have been the 18th century equivalent. You're all familiar with this map of Newport. This is the Blaskowitz map. What I wanted to point out, up here, can you see this? Did I move this for everybody?
Yes.
Okay, you can see these markings up here, the blue, the green, and the red. The red block is the Toro Synagogue, and the Newport Historical Society is right next door to it. This block, the green block, is the Baptist Church, and I'll be talking more about the Baptist Church a little later. But this Baptist Church was on the corner of Barney Street. It no longer exists, but the pulpit of that church is in the Historical Society on the second floor, or the floor where they have the pulpit on display as part of the church. It's commonly assumed that Rochambeau landed at Kings Park, and that all the fleet was moored in the harbor. Many of the diaries talk about the reception, saying that the troops were not welcome. In fact, the day that they arrived, Rochambeau landed and he found almost nobody to speak with. There were no American troops in the city. And the only person he was able to speak to was Mr. Wanton. And I presume that's Mr. Joseph Wanton, because John Wanton was out of the city at the time, and he was walking his dog around the city, and Rochambeau met him and began talking with him. Wanton invited him over to his house, and Mr. Rochambeau accepted the invitation to tea. And while he was there, he asked if there were any American troops in the area. And they sent for Colonel Christopher Green, who was colonel of the Rhode Island Regiment. who was in the Newport area, but he wasn't actually in Newport itself. So he arrived the next day, and they also sent for General, I think it was Heath, who was up in Providence, and he arrived the following day. And if you read his diary, he describes the grand reception that the French had, but he wasn't there, and he was covering his tail because even though that it was known that the French were on their way to Newport, he was not there at the time. When the troops arrived, it was a very foggy day, and in the morning, there was so much fog that the ships weighed anchor and maneuvered around the harbor. But they were out of the harbor, and they moved into the harbor in the early afternoon. So the fog lifted around noontime. There were several boats that were sent out to the ships coming in, but they were out there checking who was coming in. They were not there to pilot the ships in, and so there was nobody to guide the ships into the city, into the harbor. What Admiral de Ternay had decided was that the last ship in the fleet, which was the Amazon, was to be the only ship to disembark. So the Count de Rochambeau and his son Donatien disembarked the Duc de Bourgogne and went on board the Amazon, and they went ashore by the captain's pinnace. Now, when the Baron de Viomini realized that de Rochambeau and his son were the only ones ashore with Mr. de Biville, who was the quartermaster general, the three of them were the only people on shore, and they were looking for where to set up the camp. Well, the Baron de Viomini realized that it was not prudent to leave the general on shore alone, so he had the Grenadier Company of the Bourbonnais disembark the ship and go on board. There were other diaries here that corroborate the findings or the statements that the Count de Lauberdiere had in his diary, and they all say that there was hardly anybody around, and the shops were all closed, and the city was pretty much locked up. Well, this is what a grenadier company looks like. This is the grenadier company of the Soissonnais, and a company would have been between 70 and 100 men. And to be a grenadier, you had to be a minimum of 5 feet, 8 inches tall. And in addition to that, you had these bearskin caps, which added another 8 to 12 inches to their height. The difference between this company and the Bourbonnais is that the Bourbonnais regiment would have black, where you see the salmon color here. That was the colors indicate the different regiments, and that's how it's easy to tell which regiment is which by the color of their facings and their lapels. The troops landed on July 13th, 14th, 15th, and on the 16th they unloaded the artillery. The reason for that was that the artillery was the first stuff loaded on board the ships, and it was at the bottom of the hold, so they had to unload the entire ship before they could get at the artillery. The troops were in camp by the night of the 16th, so everybody was on land by that point, and they had to set up a number of hospitals. Several hospitals were set up long before the troops had arrived. They anticipated a lot of troops being seasick or sick from other things. So there was a hospital set up in Newport, one at Papa-Squash Point in Bristol, and another one in Providence. The one in Providence was at what is now University Hall of Brown University, which was now known as Rhode Island College back then. So when the troops arrived, there were 806 soldiers, and there were 1,500 sailors who were ill. This is not surprising due to the length of the crossing. because they were at the crossing was only 71 days, but the troops were on board ship for almost 3 months. And the reason for that is they set out from Rochefort or from Brest, and then they encountered a storm. They had to come back to port. They waited for the storm to subside. They left again. There was an accident where 2 ships collided. They came back to repair, and the whole fleet waited while these ships were being repaired. Then finally they went out again and sailed. Now, when the troops came over, nobody knew where they were sailing to. Only the Admiral de Tournay knew. Rochambeau had sealed orders that he was not to open until after they passed the Azores. And after they passed the Azores, he knew that they were coming to America, and that the first place of destination was to attempt a landing in New York and to attack the British at New York and try to expel them from there. But they found that the sandbar was the ships were too large, that they would end up being stuck on the sandbar. And if they got in at high tide, they might not be able to get out once the tide was mid-tide or low tide. So anyway, after that, they decided to go to Newport. Now, when they got to Newport, as I mentioned, many of them were ill. Rochambeau wrote to the Prince de Montbarry, who was the Minister of War at the time, indicating that in addition to his 800 soldiers, he had 1,500 sailors who were ill. During the time that the French were in Rhode Island, there were 153 deaths in Newport in that period, and 27 deaths in Providence. 35% of those deaths were in August and September in Newport, and 44% in August and September in Providence, indicating that these were the 2 most deadliest months of the French encampment in Rhode Island. Chances are that they were not all seasick. Many of them were probably from scurvy, possibly from ague, which is malaria, dysentery, cholera. The American camps often had smallpox as one of the illnesses in the camps. It's not likely that the French had many cases of smallpox because all of the troops were vaccinated before coming. So this is a quote from Lauberdiere's diary, indicating that they were at sea for 3.5 months, and that the soldiers were on board for that long, meaning that by the time they got to Newport, they were quite antsy. They were rearing for a fight all along the way. And one of the things that becomes important is that he mentions in the last sentence of this quote is that the Chevalier de Tournay missed 2 good opportunities to capture ships and enhance his glory. And many of the soldiers and a good part of the Navy sort of held that against him. He was following his orders to get the troops to America as quickly and as safely as possible, and to avoid engagements with any ships along the way. So he actually did that. He accomplished his mission, but his sailors and the soldiers that he was transporting held that against him because they were rearing for a fight and were anxious to do that. This is a passage from Rochambeau's order book, and this book has never been translated or published. It's in manuscript, and the important thing about this is this last 2 lines. This is dated June 20th. This is 4 days after the landing, or after the 4 days after the everybody is in camp. They're setting up the guards, and here Rochambeau is specifying the types of guards to be set up, and he this last line right here is that a guard is to be placed at the hospital, which is at the Baptist church. This is the Baptist church, which is on Barney Street, which I mentioned a little earlier. In the next one, he's placing a guard for Woods Castle, and you see Woods Castle right down here. The important thing is that these 3 places are the only places that have guards. and the guards are changed every day. There's a sergeant's guard at the hospital and at Woods Castle. The sergeant's guard consists of a sergeant, a corporal, and 12 soldiers. The guard that's placed at the camp is a captain's guard, and that includes a captain, a lieutenant, and 90 soldiers. So they had a quite extensive guard at the camp. Another thing about the mass, about the troops is Claude Blanchard, who was commissary of war, notes in his diary that on July 23rd, General Rochambeau wanted to attend mass at the hospital, and we know that the hospital is at the Baptist church. So this is the first written notation that the Catholic mass is at the Baptist church, which is quite ironic. In the meantime, between July 20th and 23rd, the Vicomte de Noailles is sent to Jamestown, or Connecticut Island, with the Soissonnais Regiment. And he's not only getting their land legs back, making sure that the area is safe. And Lauberdiere notes at the end of this passage that this was the only opportunity that the British had of successfully attacking the French. This was a period where they were at their weakest. They were setting up camp. They were establishing their fortifications, and many of the troops were ill. So this would have been and every day that during that week, the British were just offshore observing what the French were doing, and this would have been an opportune time. After that week was over, Rochambeau had everything in order, and they had lost their opportunity. In the meantime, one of the ships, the Ile-de-France, had become separated from the convoy, and it was agreed that if any ships became separated from the convoy, they would meet in Boston. So the Ile-de-France went to Boston, and they found out there that the rest of the army was down in Newport. So they left there and they marched to Newport. They arrived on July 28th in Newport. So it was just about 2 weeks after the rest of the army arrived. Maybe I should stop here and open up for questions. Do we have any questions?
There is one question from David and Jane Raymond. Was French support for the revolution the goal of increasing French control of the Caribbean trade while distracting Britain in war with its colonies?
Yeah, the French had a very strong presence in the Caribbean. They had a number of islands that they had in the West Indies that were their sugar islands, and those were very important to them. And their participation in the American Revolution was probably to a large degree to protect their sugar islands. At this point, I want to expound on a couple of passages in the diary, because these passages sort of come off as matter of fact, and there's a lot more to understanding them than what is actually made in the statement. And it requires some background knowledge, and it's something that is too lengthy to put in a footnote. One of the things that Lauberdiere mentions is that the French celebrated St. Louis Day. August 25th is St. Louis Day, which is the name day of the king. So essentially, this is probably more important than his birthday, because this is the day that he gets his official name as King of France. And the statement in the diary says that Rochambeau reviewed the troops, and then there was a feu de joie, and it specifies how many shots were fired by the troops and the artillery and the forts. So the diary doesn't explain the import of that, and I want to expound on that. Rochambeau reviews the troops. assuming there were over 6,100 troops who were here, assuming that 800 troops plus sailors are, well, actually, this is back in August, so many of the troops may have been recovered at this point, but assuming that these soldiers were still in the hospital, this parade of the troops would have covered about 5,000 soldiers, between 5 and 6,000. Now this would have been involved a parade. I don't know that the Macy's Day Parade or the Gaspee Day Parade has as many as 5,000 soldiers, 5,000 people marching. But when they went through Philadelphia, one of the diaries notes that it took several hours for the troops to march through Philadelphia. So it was like a parade of 2-3 hours. So this review of the troops would have included this parade, as well as the inspection of the representatives of the troops along the way. So this would have been some 5,000 soldiers. Now, after the parade, they had a feu de joie. A feu de joie is a running fire. There's one series of fire that runs from left to right, then right to left, and then the entire army would fire at the same time. Now, when you've got a small group, say like maybe a battalion or a regiment, which would be 10 companies, you could fire by companies, or you'd have individuals firing. When you're firing with this large an army, you would probably fire by regiments, which means the regiments were they were supercharged by when they came to America. So most of the regiments were 1,100 to 1,200, and some even 1,300 soldiers. So assuming that there's a 10% misfire rate, there would be about between 14 and 15,000 rounds fired for the soldiers. The forts fired 3 cannon shots per piece. The forts included 8 cannons of 8 12-pounders, 20 18-pounders, 24 24-pounders, and 9 36-pounders. That's 61 guns and 17 mortars for a total of 183 shots of the artillery. The fleet would fire 21 shots per vessel. There were 48 vessels, 8 ships of the line, 2 frigates, 2 bomb galleots, and 36 transports, meaning there were 699 guns. That means a total of 1,008 shots, which would have been between 2,800 and 3,500 pounds of gunpowder. That's between 1.5 tons and 2 tons of gunpowder. That is one heck of a fireworks display. That's something you would never see in today. This is an image or a photograph of a feu de joie at Fort Adams, and this is the whole company of reenactors firing at the same time. And this is a very small group compared to the army that Rochambeau had. On August 29th to September 2nd, there was a delegation of Native Americans who came down from the New York area. There were 22 Iroquois, Illinois, and 4 Nations representatives who came to Newport, first to praise Rochambeau, to proclaim their allegiance to the king, and to request a priest. Rochambeau let them have, he authorized one of the Capuchin priests from one of the ships to go with the Native Americans. He was on leave, and he was to come back after 2 months to rejoin the army. The guy never showed up again, so apparently he decided to stay with the Indians. Rochambeau also gave gifts from the king to the Native Americans, and while they were there, he assigned them to an empty house in the city for their lodging, and he posted 2 grenadiers at the doors to prevent them from going out. The reason for that is that he did not want them going out to get drunk and raising a ruckus in the city, so he kept them pretty much under guard. And the following day, he invited them to dinner at his quarters. And while they were here, the Native Americans were able to review the army under arms, and they were especially impressed by Luzern's hussars, who paraded at the gallop, and they were really impressed at the maneuvers. They also got to go aboard ship and to see the different vessels that were anchored in the harbor. Now, one of the things that is noted in Lauberdiere's diary in particular, but is also noted in other diaries, is that Rochambeau kept a very strict discipline in camp, so strict that the day after troops landed, one of the soldiers was caught or accused of stealing a piece of cheese from a windowsill at a private home. And he was actually, I don't think he was court-martialed. I think he was just summarily ordered to get 30 lashes the following day in punishment. So the troops were very kept under very strict discipline in camp, and so much so that in Lauberdiere's diary he notes that the troops who were camped in an apple orchard, the Native Americans were surprised to look at the trees, and all the trees were still full of apples. Any other army would have devoured those apples, and the trees would have been bare, because this was right at the height of harvest time, and any other army would have eaten those trees bare. Interesting things that are in the diary are descriptions of customs and practices. For example, one rather lengthy passage discusses Lauberdiere describes a Quaker wedding, and he describes it pretty much in detail. And at the end of the wedding, he talks about how the couple goes off to their home and everybody disperses. And he makes the note that the wedding resembled more of a funeral than a wedding. In October, another delegation of Abenaki and Micmac Native Americans comes to Newport to request charity from the Count de Rochambeau. And they stay a few days. Rochambeau gives them some blankets and trinkets and so on, and then they go back to their native tribes. Now, in September, just before this delegation of Native Americans comes, Rochambeau and his aides-de-camp, not all of his aides-de-camp, but several of his aides-de-camp went to Hartford in September 20th to 22nd. They go down to meet with General Washington. Washington is there with Lafayette, who serves as Washington's interpreter. And Washington had another interpreter, the son of the president of Congress at the time. Again, on May 20th, 1781, there's another conference between those parties at Wethersfield, Connecticut, which is right near Hartford. A lot of people talk about these conferences. There were no notes taken, and everything that was discussed in these conferences was kept secret. So none of the diaries of the participants, the aides-de-camp or anything, talks about the discussions that were held at these conferences. Assume that the two commanders were planning the siege of Yorktown, and neither of these conferences would have been for that purpose, because Cornwallis was in Petersburg, Virginia at that time, and he did not arrive in Yorktown until August 1st, long after these two conferences. So what they were most likely discussing were ways of collaborating and plans on how to do things, and what Washington insisted on attacking, or he wanted to attack New York. And so when they left Newport, they spent a month in the the greater New York area, mostly up at an area called Continental Camp, which was up in Phillipsburg. And they stayed there for about a month. They had a number of skirmishes, but they realized that the British Army was too strong to attack them there. So that's when they decided to move to Newport, toward Yorktown. So by early October, the troops were already quite bored. They had nothing to do. Rochambeau had them rebuilding and restoring houses that the British had demolished while they were in Newport, and they were going to use those as barracks during the winter quarters. Another thing that Rochambeau had them do was play war games, and Lauberdiere's diary indicates that the war games were held at Wood's Castle, which was the landing place. And while they were there, this was entertainment for the residents. So a lot of the residents would go out and witness the war games, much as people would go to reenactments today. And while the games were going on, one of the field pieces fired. Well, actually, there was a misfire, and they ended up firing a ramrod down the field, and the ramrod sort of tumbled like head over heels. It just was spinning around. It ended up hitting one woman in the leg and severely injuring her. So after that incident, Rochambeau ordered the surgeon from the Bourbonnais Regiment to be her personal physician to take care of her during her recuperation. The Bourbonnais Regiment, the reason that the Bourbonnais Regiment is being called on for a number of these things is that they were the senior regiment of Rochambeau's army, and they were the first unit that he would call upon for activities. Another thing I want to talk about is de Tonnay's death and funeral. Rochambeau happened to be in Boston when de Tonnay died, and the Count de Lauberdiere, who is his nephew, and he was also an aide-de-camp, went to Boston to get him. Lauberdiere returned immediately, and he got back to Newport before Rochambeau did. He arrived on the morning of the 16th, but he arrived after de Tonnay had been buried. Rochambeau slept along the route, and he didn't arrive until that night, so it was quite a bit later. So one of the things that occurred from the time that de Tonnay died to the time he was actually buried, which was almost, well, he died on the 15th and buried on the 16th, so almost 24 hours. His flagship fired guns every half hour, and the land troops fired their muskets 3 volleys at the same time. Now, when they had the funeral, Lauberdiere notes that the admiral was not mourned by his officers, the men of his fleet, and he said he commanded harshly and was not very approachable, and he was dry and reserved. He also notes that though de Tonnay was a good admiral, he never distinguished himself in his command. And he notes that particularly that incident in the Chesapeake Bay, when he could have captured 2 British ships with very little difficulty, the soldiers lost confidence in him, and so did the sailors. They were raring for a fight, and they could have captured 2 very good ships very easily. So when the funeral occurred, Lauberdiere notes that he was not regretted by the army or the navy, and that very few people followed his cortege. Now, one of the things about the funeral is that from the green line here marks the parade route from the Hunter House in Newport all the way to Trinity Church. Now, the troops would usually be lined up shoulder to shoulder, giving about 28 inches per man. Well, the entire army was displayed along the parade route, shoulder to shoulder on both sides of the street, two ranks deep. Well, to put the size of the army along that parade route, two men deep and shoulder to shoulder, you could spread the men out by 36 inches. You could give them 36 inches of space. So instead of being 28 inches of space, you could give them a little bit more breathing room. And this would have occupied the entire army, leaving the Navy to march in the cortege. But apparently the cortege did not consist of many of the sailors. So it was a rather small cortege. Other things that are in the book that are of interest is the culture clash that the Americans and the French had on New Year's Day, when they were greeting each other and seeing each other doing different types of greeting and being astounded at the customs. He also talks a lot about life in Newport, particularly during the period where they're in winter quarters and there's not much happening. The troops are pretty much bored. He's able to expound a lot more on Newport life, religion. He talks about the 5 major denominations in Newport. He talks about a Quaker sewing bee. He talks about the Quaker marriage ceremony, which I mentioned a little earlier. He also mentions the Champlain family and goes on a couple of pages about the Champlain family and the daughters. And then there's a lengthy section on the march to Yorktown. The interesting thing about this march to Yorktown is that he is noting all the people and places along the way that he's seeing and the people he encounters. And this particular journal could serve as a guidebook for the march to Yorktown route. I've got notes here on Chatham and Crampon, which could be stories unto themselves, but I noticed that I'm close to the end of the hour, so I'll rather than talk about that, I'll open it up for questions.
We do have some feedback from the audience. So Margaret Flagg, she writes, the first Catholic Mass was celebrated in King's Chapel was the funeral of Le Chevalier de Saint-Sauveur, who was killed during a bread riot provoked by the French fleet's bakers making bread to feed the troops. So if you know of any stories similar to this for
the Saint-Sauveur instance was actually during D'Estaing's period, when D'Estaing left after the hurricane. He went to Boston to refit, and while they were there, this instance occurred during that period. So this would have been a couple of years earlier than Rhode Island, and that would have been the Catholic Mass in Boston, not in Rhode Island, because Catholics were not allowed. Rhode Island was sort of banned Catholics until the French arrived. So Catholics were not allowed to hold office or to run for election, or they could not hold any official positions. So they were discriminated against. They didn't even have the right to vote until I think it was 1827 when they were given the right to vote. There are a number of stories about the Saint-Sauveur instance that tie in with Rhode Island, but they're rather lengthy at this point. One of them is one of the engineers who was assigned to work on the defenses in Boston, and he had come from Newport because he was injured in Newport at the Battle of Rhode Island.
Mike Barbary writes, some Americans continue to plan incursions or invasions of Canada. What, if anything, has your research shown about the French attitude towards retaking Canada?
French were not so much interested in Canada. They thought that the Americans thought that the French would be interested in regaining their territory that they lost in Canada, and that they tried to make Canada like a 14th colony, but they did not get enough support to do that, to invade Canada for that matter. Although in my book on America's First Ally, I cover a number of actions that occurred in Canada and that involved French people and also French people who were in America. And Holly Meyer just published a book about the same time as my diary of Lauberdière on one of the two regiments from Canada that fought in the American Revolution. So most of them were French Canadians who would have fought in the American Army. I think she talks about Congress's own regiment, which was one of those two regiments. The other one was a regiment commanded by I think Henry Livingston.
Our next comment comes from Larry Ferriero, who writes that John Lawrence was also an interpreter.
Yes, John Lawrence was the interpreter. I was drawing a blank with that name when I was mentioning it. So John Lawrence was Washington's interpreter. He was also Duportail's interpreter when Duportail was negotiating with Benjamin Franklin. So he was in France at that time and served as his intermediary. And John Lawrence was also, I think the reason he was in France at the time is he had just been released from the Tower of London, where he was imprisoned for quite some time. And he was on his way back to America when he stopped to meet with Ben Franklin in Paris.
Our next question comes from David and Jane Raymond. The French Army and Navy appear to have no fear of running out of powder from the number of training exercises and celebrations. Was this expedition given an extraordinary amount of powder to bring with them? It would seem unlikely that American sources could provide this.
Well, the Americans couldn't provide the gunpowder because there were no powder mills in America, and we did not have the capability of making gunpowder, and it was also forbidden by the British. So we did not have that capability. One of the people who came over and taught us how to make gunpowder was Nicolas Fouché, I think. And I cover that in America's First Ally. So he taught the Americans how to make gunpowder, and he also served Massachusetts in the making of gunpowder. And what was interesting is that he did not request a salary. What he requested was what would have been a small pittance, like a quarter of $1 in payment for the amount of gunpowder they produced. And he ended up making a fortune, much more than he would have made had he gotten a salary based on that. And even after the war was over, he was still collecting sort of like residuals, or they were still paying him, and Massachusetts was still paying him on a regular basis.
Our last question is from Sherman Loans, who asks, where in Newport were the French camped?
If you're familiar with Newport, Spring Street, right near the public library, there's a St. Matthew's Church, which is Lutheran church at that corner. Anyway, the 3 blocks from Pope Street to Pope Street South, those 3 blocks covering the church and the parking lot, were the artillery park for the Army. The artillery regiment was camped to the left of that artillery park. The camp was facing the ocean, so the camp was actually the back of the camp was facing Newport, So they would expect that any attack would have come from the ocean, from the British. So that's why they had the camp facing the ocean. So the camp went from Spring Street all the way across to Annandale Avenue, all the way to where Cliff Walk is on the other side of the island. There was a space in the middle around where Bellevue Avenue is today, where there was like a break in the camp. That road at the time was called Jew Street. It was expanded into Bellevue Avenue later, and then the mansions were constructed along that area. But back in the 18th century, that was just a cow path, and the troops made a break in the camp so that cow path could have been used for moving cattle back and forth. However, that area between the two sections of camp was heavily guarded with artillery. So there was quite a bit of artillery in the space there, as well as the artillery that was in the artillery park. And between each regiment, there were artillery pieces between each campsite of the regiments. So the army would have been spread out clear across the island in that. And I'm going to try to bring up a map of where that camp is. Here is the artillery park, and it extends all the way out here to actually beyond Cliff Avenue. So this is the artillery camp, the Bourbonnais camp, Royal Dupont, Saint-Onge, and Soissonnais. So they would, this road here is just sort of, it runs at about a 12-degree angle from Spring Street, clear across, and it runs pretty much along, well, here, the south part of the camp is south of Barney Street or Bowery Street, and the eastern part of the camp is north of Bowery Street. That's where the camp is.
Well, thank you very much, Norm, for sharing
Welcome.
your time and your expertise with us this evening. I see we're getting some feedback too in the chat. Everyone, you're thanking for this wonderful presentation. So I'm going to close things out, and I wish you all bonne soirée.
Well, thank you very much. It was my pleasure.